Welcome to this little reflection on Celtic spirituality, leaning into some of the writings of John O'Donohue, particularly from the Divine Imagination, as well as some little videos from Ireland and the County Clare, where John O'Donohue is from, and a little bit of background on what is Celtic spirituality and the primary concepts in Celtic spirituality. An introduction to the Divine Imagination by John O'Donohue. When God is hardened into a visible image and worship reduced to a program, we remain exiled from what is truly sacred in the world around us and the divine imagination that created it. In this third volume of his Celtic Wisdom trilogy, John O'Donohue immerses us in what has been called the greatest miracle of Celtic spirituality, which is non-dualism, and its tradition of experiencing the divine as a lyrical, tender, creative force, not visible, but always present. But first, a little video to show you what it looks like to live in County Clare, an idea of the beautiful landscape in which John O'Donohue grew up and which helped shape and form his experience of Celtic spirituality. About 2,500 years ago, in the year 500 BCE, before the Common Era, around the same time that Confucius was teaching in China, Buddha was teaching in India, and Jeremiah was the prophet of the Hebrew people, a tribe of people known as the Celts invaded Ireland. They defeated the early inhabitants, the Tuatha, the people of the goddess Dana. An agreement was reached whereby Ireland was divided between them in two equal parts. The Celts got Ireland above the ground, and the Tuatha got Ireland beneath the ground. So the Tuatha shapeshifted and became the Sloshee, the fairy host. This is an image of the kind of places where the people in Ireland and the Celtic people believe the fairy hosts live. There are three key concepts to understanding Celtic spirituality, and they are imagination, knowledge and wisdom, fact and truth. Imagination is not the ability to make stuff up, stuff that's not real. That's called fantasy, but rather the ability to shift one's state of consciousness, enter into different dimensions, interact with the beings and energies that reside in those dimensions, learn from them, bring that learning back and cross-fertilize it with the learning of the ordinary consciousness. Knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is information which is accessed via the senses and processed by the brain. It allows us to navigate in the ordinary state of consciousness in the physical world. Wisdom, on the other hand, is information which is accessed via the soul and processed by the heart. It allows us to navigate in all states of consciousness in both the metaphysical and the physical. Fact and truth. A fact is a data point in the physical, ordinary state of consciousness and corroborates with some kind of model or map that we have of what we think of as reality. But truth is different. Truth is something that transforms and aligns one with the source, with God the Creator, and it doesn't have to be factual. It's something that is ultimately true if it transforms us radically and aligns us with God. Jesus often told things that were true, the truth, through parables. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus is telling something true, deeply true and profound, that summarizes the way he conveys the entire meaning of all the law. And in the Bible, there's 613 commandments, there's 613 laws that people learn to live by, but Jesus summarizes them simply as love God, love yourself, and love your neighbor as yourself. And the parable of the Good Samaritan is a key story in conveying this truth. Celtic spirituality has some concepts called wisdom keepers, and this is an ancient image of three wisdom keepers: the bards, the ovates, and the druids. The bards were keepers of the past. Ovates were those who were keepers of the wisdom of the future. And the third order of wisdom keepers were the druids. They were the intellectual giants of the Celtic world. The bards were the keepers of the past. A bard would either be a permanent member of a chieftain's court or a nomad who visited there for a time and then moved on. As keeper of the past, the bard was historian, genealogist, poet, minstrel, storyteller, and performing artist. The bard had to produce three kinds of music: music that soothes the savage beast, such as lullabies, music that introduced a profound nostalgia and would lead to tears, and music that fills people with joy and makes them laugh from the soul to the eyes. Storytelling was not primarily about entertaining or information. It was about transformation. The great storyteller engages the imagination and invites people to explore new ideas and ways of being in relationship with oneself, with nature, with other people, and with all the creatures on the earth and in other dimensions. The second order of wisdom keepers was the ovates, who were the keepers of the wisdom of the future. They conducted the ceremonies that escorted people through the rites of passage, initiation to different levels of human life trajectory. They were the seers, the psychics, the shamans, the visionaries, and the prophets. And the function of a prophet is not to predict the future. The prophet, or the ovate, is the one who sees the present reality clearly, unlike the rest of us who primarily see obtusely. The ovate/prophet helps guide people with wisdom and insight about the consequences of actions and choices so that better decisions might be made. In ancient Israel, for example, the prophet would call the Hebrew nation back into alignment with its covenant with God. And for the ancient Celts, the ovate would call the people back into alignment with their goddess of nature. The third order of wisdom keeper were called druids. They were the intellectual giants of the Celtic world. They were the scientists and astronomers, and for the Celts, as for many ancient peoples like the Sumerians, Egyptians, and Mayans, astronomy was based on the deep realization that the universe as a whole is an interrelated puzzle with all the parts being in significant relationship. The Druids were also the philosophers and psychologists delving into the meaning of life. As theologians and priests, they attempted to understand and dialogue with the goddesses and gods. As healers, they tried to restore and maintain balance among all these moving parts. And finally, they were the lawyers and judges, guiding the application of the Brehon laws, which is an older system than English legal code. It was a system of fines often paid in cattle. Celtic spirituality also thinks of the world in terms of three realms. There's a heavenly realm inhabited by gods and goddesses, the earthly realm inhabited by humans and by flora and fauna, and the underworld inhabited by the ancestors and by the fairy folk. These three realms interacted regularly, and the function of ritual was to facilitate the trialogue. The Celtic knot is an artistic reminder of that conversation. Three more terms that are useful in understanding Celtic spirituality and which John O'Donohue uses frequently. One is the concept of the thin place, a reminder that there are locations where the veil between the mystical and the mundane, between the sacred and the secular, between God and us is thin, diaphanous. There are entry points into other dimensions. Limina. In Latin, this means a threshold. Liminality refers to sacred time. The year begins in darkness, the sacred womb of new life, from which all life and light is birthed into existence. Darkness was the feminine aspect of God. Darkness and light were lovers, not enemies. Then there's the concept of nature. So intertwined is all of life with the natural world that it's like a marriage between entities, all creatures, and the divine creator. Columba, born about December 7th, 521, and died around the 9th of June, 597, was an Irish abbot and missionary evangelist credited with spreading Christianity in what's today's Scotland and starting the Hiberno-Scottish mission. He founded the Abbey of Iona on the island of Iona, which has become a dominant religious and political institution in the region for centuries. He's the patron saint of Derry in North Ireland, and he's highly regarded by both the indigenous people of Scotland, the Gael, the Dal, Riata, and the Picts. and is remembered today as a saint in the Roman Catholic Church and the Episcopal Church in many denominations, and is also considered to be one of the 12 apostles of Ireland. St. Bridget of Kildare, which is south of Dublin, or St. Bridget of Ireland, was born around 451, so she was born about a century before Columba. She's a patroness saint of Ireland and is one of its 3 national saints along with Patrick and Columba. According to medieval Irish hagiographies, she was an abbess who founded an important abbey in Kildare, as well as several other convents of nuns. She's a patroness of many things, including poetry, learning, healing, protection, blacksmithing, livestock, and dairy production. In her honor, a perpetual fire was kept burning at Kildare for centuries. Some historians suggest that Bridget is the Christianization of the Celtic goddess Bride. St. Bridget's feast day is the 1st of February and it traditionally involves weaving bridges, crosses, and many other folk customs. St. Patrick was a 5th century Romano-British Christian missionary and bishop in Ireland. Known as the Apostle of Ireland, he's the primary patron saint of Ireland, but there are others, including Bridget of Kildare and Columba. Patrick was never formally canonized, having lived before the current laws of the Catholic Church in these matters. Nevertheless, he's venerated as a saint of the Roman Catholic Church, the Lutheran Church, the Church of Ireland, which is part of the Anglican Communion, the Episcopal Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, where he's regarded as equal to the apostles and the enlightener of Ireland. St. Margaret of Scotland, also known as Margaret of Wessex, was an English princess and a Scottish queen. Margaret was sometimes called the Pearl of Scotland. Born in the Kingdom of Hungary to the expatriate English Prince Edward the Exile, Margaret and her family returned to England in 1057. Among other deeds, Margaret is known as part of the restoration of the Iona Abbey, so the abbey was destroyed by the Vikings, and she helped to restore it. And St. Augustine is referred to several times by John O'Donohue. He was a 5th century theologian and philosopher. He established a vein of Christian thought regarding original sin and just war theory, and the controversial line of the Nicene Creed that's been rejected by the Church and the Holy Spirit, the Eastern Church rather, and the Holy Spirit, stating that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. It's called the Filioque. So he was instrumental in some of that conversation around the Nicene Creed as well. On the Sundays, when we offer the in-person Celtic spirituality class, we are able to listen to audio files of John O'Donohue himself speaking. Those audio files are copyright protected, so I have permission to use them in the class, but I can't use them in a recording that I'm uploading to YouTube. So in place of that, I will summarize what I at least understand from John O'Donohue's audio files and what he's presenting in terms of his understanding of the divine imagination and its connection to Christianity and Celtic spirituality. These are just my reflections. Someone else might hear other important points coming from O'Donohue's reflections in those audio files. You can also purchase the audio file of Divine Imagination at the johnodonohue.com website, where they offer books and audio files from John O'Donohue. For John O'Donohue, true worship was not a mental process, a way of thinking, but a way of living fully that allows for the flowering of our own sense of divinity, how we are connected to God. In these ancient ways of knowing God, we find eternal teachings for connecting with the sacred. Complete with original Celtic teachings and enlivened with poetry and philosophy from past and present, John O'Donohue's The Divine Imagination calls us to approach each day with wonder, knowing that God is always present. And now for my little teaching on what I have heard from the first audio file from Divine Imagination, John O'Donohue. These are just my takeaways from it. Anyway, how we live, O'Donohue says, is so externally focused that we become disconnected from our Creator. We forget the mystery of life. That mystery can be encountered in the thresholds between the external world that we know so well as it crosses over into the mystery of the internal world, a place that we do not know well at all. O'Donohue uses a number of metaphors, the threshold being one of them. As John O'Donohue begins the audio file for Divine Imagination, he begins with a poem called Old Origins. And I'm not sure where that poem is from. I've not been able to locate it. It might have been written by O'Donohue. It might have been written by someone else. I'm assuming it's his, that he wrote it. And it's a lovely poem that invites us into imagining where are we from in our very most ancient origin of self. And from that, he eventually gets to the place where he says, we are not from a particular street or address or city or town or nation. We are from God. And in talking about that we are from God, he begins to use metaphors like threshold is a metaphor that he loves to use. Some of the metaphors that John O'Donohue uses are words like journey, threshold, circle, and clay. Journey talks about where we have come from. O'Donohue will say that we didn't ask to be here, we were called forth. That we belong to the divine within us. We do not belong to a particular place, as I said earlier. And that we end up using images of God that are too small for the divine, and we limit who the divine is and who we are as well. So threshold is the metaphor that he uses to begin to explain how it is that we come from the divine, that we were called forth. The threshold is a threshold between light and darkness, not in a dualistic way, but in a very harmonious, synchronous, interconnected, interwoven way, because it's powerful. These ideas of light and darkness are powerful in every light. It's where the imagination lives and where we encounter the presence of God. He calls this the twilight side of the heart. And it's always inflamed with this ancient longing for God, this longing that lives within us, a longing to come home to the divine, to the God who called us forth, and that nothing is nearer to us than the presence of the divine. Another metaphor is the metaphor of the circle. A circle is seen in the horizon, in the sky, in the water. Everything that we can see is surrounded and embraced in a circle, embraced by God. God is imagined as the ultimate circle that embraces everything. There is no outside to the divine. The divine gathers and includes everything in it, or in that circle. And clay is another metaphor. Clay is like the dirt that we hear in the beginning of the creation stories. We're made from clay, but we're not in the clay. We've moved out of it. And we breathe the air, but we are not in the air. We ultimately become strangers to both the earth and the air and all the elements in it. One of the people that O'Donohue quotes frequently is St. Augustine, who was a 4th century early church father, writer, very influential in the formation of Christianity. We mentioned him earlier in this slideshow. So St. Augustine says that God is more intimate to me than I am to myself, meaning that God knows us better than we know ourselves. God knows our true nature, and yet we have become disconnected from that nature, from ourselves, and from God. Our images of God are too small And thus the Celtic image of God is a circle that embraces everything and everyone. God is the circle. God is in the circle. We are in the circle with God, and no one is outside the circle of God's embrace. This concludes session 1 of our little study on Celtic spirituality and leaning into some of the thoughts from John O'Donohue in his audio file called Divine Imagination. If you come to either Church of the Resurrection Episcopal Church in Gilbert, Arizona on the third Sunday of the month, we will have a live session of this Celtic spirituality. And if you come to St. Michael's Coolidge on the fourth Sunday of the month, we will also have a live session. So it's St. Michael's in Coolidge on the fourth Sunday. That's at 8 a.m. in the morning. And at Resurrection on the third Sunday, it's at noon. And then we'll have audio files. I've been given permission to play audio files of John O'Donohue himself speaking from the Divine Imagination. In this recorded version, I will record my takeaways, the things that I hear and I'm thinking about as I listen to those audio files from John O'Donohue. So thank you for joining us for session 1. Session 2 will be up sometime towards the end of July. Take care.